British election in history.
Before we begin this series, I'd like to thank Mr. Beat, not to be confused with Mr. Beast, for the idea of this series. He has an excellent series called Every American Election in American History that I can simply not recommend enough as a starting point if you want to research American history. They're pretty short, like 4 or 5 minutes, but if you want to start to research American elections, you can easily binge watch like 20 in a day. Not saying I have. Unless you're not interested in American elections, then don't watch them. This series won't be of high as a quality or as entertaining as his series. The main idea of this series is how I notice Americans put much more emphasis on their presidents than we, the British, do our prime ministers. I think that's due to a variety of factors, really. Namely, the difference between a parliamentary system and a presidential system, which we have the parliamentary and the Americans have the presidential. But I think British MPs deserve a little more love. Although I do think the real reason we put a bit more emphasis, we don't put as much emphasis on our British prime ministers, is that we actually have expectations for our children. Oh, yeah, shout out to Mr. Beat. Go watch him. Wait, no. Go watch my channel, then watch his channel, and then mine again. Doubles my views. Wait, no. Watch his channel, watch my channel, watch his again, and then watch mine again. Wait, no, hang on. Is this video even being monetized? Isn't this whole thing useless if I'm not being monetized in the first place? Because then I'm... did this meme die out in 2015? Lastly, yes, I know I'm eating up your time at this point. It's nearly 2 minutes in, but please go read sources. I cannot stress this enough. Go do it. Google it for all I care, but please go do your own research. Like, these videos will be, aside from this one, which is understandable because it's an introduction, like 10 minutes long at most, maybe 15. 10 probably the max will reach. So, like, do your own research, especially with subjects like elections. And I do my best to cite sources, but in the description or the end of the videos, but please go do your own research. And now we have all those boring disclaimers out the way. It's time to get to the part you actually, clicked on the video for. So, I had a bit of an issue before I started this video. So I'm going to give you a little question. When do you think the first British election is? And I ask that because I don't think even half of the historians can settle on it. So, on one hand, we have 1992, which was the first after the Irish War of Independence, has the first modern election, modern quote-unquote, with the Labour and Tory party, and it seems like a good candidate. But I excluded that because it wasn't the first election to the modern House of Commons. Then there was the 1708 election, and I excluded that because it wasn't the first election to the modern House of Commons. It was the election to the old House of Commons, which is very different, let me tell you. I get very mad about it. So ultimately, I decided on actually the most boring out of the three, 1802. So give it up for 1802, everyone. Look, see, I like 1922 so much, I almost said it. And frankly, I don't think 1802 really deserves it. It only got it because the Act of the Union 1800 was passed before it, and therefore it basically cheats its way to it. Anyways, so, the 1802 British election was held on the 5th of July to the 28th of August, 1802. At the time, there was much corruption in the British political system. The main element of this corruption was known as the rotten boroughs. The rotten boroughs were often constituencies with very, very, very small population who could easily be convinced via bribing or just threatening, since voting was public back then. And if someone slipped you a tenner, I'm pretty sure you would vote for who they told you to. The most infamous of these constituencies was known as, and forgive me for my pronunciation here, Old Sarum. And this, reportedly, by 1820, only had a population of 7, but still had one parliamentary constituency, and it was the seat of the Prime Minister. Not the Prime Minister at that point. Actually, that was a different guy who we'll get to. But this was William Pitt the Younger, who I'm 90% sure only got the job because he put "my dad was also Prime Minister" on his CV. He wasn't in this election, but he was important. So just pretend he's in the background doing this entire thing. Now, Pitt, despite being Prime Minister for like 20 years at that point, had been dismissed in 1801 for trying to grant Catholics emancipation, allowing them to serve in Parliament, by King George III, who really hated Catholics, and at the time, the monarch could just fire the Prime Minister, so he did. Now, William Pitt had dominated the Tories for pretty much like decades, and the Tories weren't really sure what to do without him. But luckily, the Whigs were more divided. Now, it's important to note that parties at this time often fluctuated because of the way the Georgian electoral system worked. So pretty much back then, elections were really local. Like, we pretend that they're local nowadays, but they are local back then. So pretty much, parties often fluctuated, and they didn't really have solid leaders because MPs were truly just people with similar ideas who would sometimes agree to form parties. Anyway, with that weird disclaimer out of the way, it's time to introduce our first quote-unquote leader, James Charles Fox. James Charles Fox has been an arch rival, needless to say, of William Pitt, and had run 4 times, or maybe 3 times against him. Do you know how much you have to hate a guy to do that? James Charles Fox was very radical. Not really, but his enemies framed him as such. He said that the Tory government had encroached too much upon civil liberties during its handling of the Napoleonic Wars. He led a faction of the Whigs known as the Foxites. Yeah, they really weren't that creative with names back then. And then we have the incumbent, Henry Addington. Henry Addington had been appointed in the year before, as I mentioned, due to Pitt's forced firing. Addington was appointed for his foreign policy skills, and he proved successful on that front. He negotiated the Treaty of, oh god, I'm going to butcher this, Amiens, and also got rid of the very unpopular wartime income tax. Overall, going into 1802, he seemed to be quite a popular incumbent. He led a faction known as the Addington. The last major faction leader was William Windham. William Windham was the only candidate running who actually opposed the Treaty of Amiens. Both Charles James Fox, although he disagreed with how the government went about it, and obviously, Addington considered he negotiated it, supported the treaty. William Windham did not, and he believed that the government should keep at war with Napoleonic France. Windham's third-party candidacy, led by a faction known as the Grenville'ites, was also attracted a lot of Pittites, as they were dissatisfied with Addington's government's policies, seeing it as a betrayal of what Pitt did. And the results are... Drumroll, please. What do you mean we don't have a drumroll sound effect? I paid good money for this video. Okay, fine. Do the slide whistle then. The winner was clearly Henry Addington, winning 467 out of 658 seats. An absolute landslide, although it's important to note most of those seats were uncontested. We don't know his popular vote percentage due to records not going back that far, and I would butcher the name of his seat, so I'm not going to pronounce it. In a distant second was Charles James Fox, winning 124 out of 650 seats, although again, most of those seats weren't contested. Again, we don't know his popular vote percentage, but we do know that his seat was in Westminster. And coming in last, with a very distant third, is William Windham, who won 25 out of 658 seats. Again, we don't know their popular vote percentage, and St. Mawes was William Windham's seat. It's undoubtable Windham's campaign attracted a lot of former Pittites and Tories, but it just simply wasn't enough to overcome the popular Addington. Really, the only interesting thing that happened in these election results was in Middlesex, which might have one of the most unfortunate names I've ever heard for a UK constituency in my life. Anyway, in Middlesex, a radical politician named Sir Francis Burnett, I'm so sorry if I butchered that name, Middlesexian, and, oh god, that sounds so bad, and a Whig faced off against each other. Despite the vote being close, there were tons of arguments and recounts over how close the vote was, and the seat went back and forth for a couple of years, including, I'm pretty sure, the next election, until eventually it was settled in the courts in a couple of years later. But it did show that the radicals, and I mean real radicals, like the French revolutionaries, but in Britain, not like the Foxites, who were more moderate, who were just pretending to be radical, could actually win, sort of, kind of, if you don't have a recount. Addington had mainly won because of him scrapping the wartime tax and slowly improving the economy, his enemies splitting the vote, and altogether a popularity with his foreign successes. It seemed, with the Treaty of Amiens, that the Napoleonic Wars might be coming to an end. We'll see how that goes. I'll see you in the next election.